Hi there, Kerry MacConnell from the RDI Hub here. Today we are interviewing Shane Kavanagh, the Group Marketing Director of Fexco. Shane has over 20 years' experience working in over 20 countries across multiple industries, including advertising, digital, telecoms, media, recruitment tech, luxury tourism and golf before joining Fexco. And that's over 10 years ago. Shane, you are very welcome today. Thank you for joining us in the RDI Hub Media Lab. You just gave us a presentation and a Q&A to our members here on understanding your ideal customer profile. There's some really good insights there for our members and for when they're working on their customer discovery process. So Shane, tell us a little about your key projects and processes. I suppose just start by telling us a bit about your very varied background.
Hi, Kerry, thanks. It's lovely to actually be here in the RDI Hub and be able to kind of just have a little bit of a chat with people about, our marketing processes and how we use the focus that we put on the customer to drive everything that we do. So from my own background, I, as you said, I'm not sure what else I need to say. I've been working in marketing in leadership roles for over 20 years across advertising, marketing, commercial roles. I've worked in China, the US, the Caribbean, the Middle East, the UK, Ireland, and generally they've been in media businesses, in advertising, in tech, in telecoms, and in odd things like recruitment tech and in golf. And I was saying to the team out on the floor, I think I'm the only marketing director to be marketing director for a golf resort too, actually, and never have held a golf club in my entire life. So I had to pretty much fake it till I made it in that one.
And lots of stamps on your passport. Definitely interesting career there.
Yeah.
Well, marketing is such a broad topic. I could literally kind of talk to you for like days here. But on your presentation today, you were discussing building out customer profiles. So for the uninitiated, could you explain the process of building your ideal customer profile and just the rationale behind it?
Sure. So the rationale behind it's really quite simple. It's about keeping the focus on the customer, right? So with all things in marketing, the customer has to be at the heart of everything we do. Understanding the customer drives every element of every campaign and every part of the mix for the marketing team in Fexco and for pretty much every marketing team across the world. The problem is it's really easy to get kind of lost in the fog of war when you're kind of in the throes of campaigns, in the throes of kind of your day-to-day operations. So we use the concept of the ideal customer profile to keep us focused on delivering value for the customer and therefore delivering value for the business. So the ideal customer profile at its most basic is understanding the ideal business that you want to sell to. And that gets into things like the size of the company, the industry that it's in, the number of employees, the type of marketing and general tech stacks that it utilizes, the pain points that it has, the individuals you want to talk to and who's an influencer, who's a decision maker, who's a gatekeeper, and all of those elements combine under one kind of ideal theoretic company. Now, if you're an existing business with lots of customers, you can do some analysis to see really what your ideal customer is from a relationship perspective, from a profitability perspective, from a long-term growth perspective. But if you're a startup, as or an early stage business, a lot of the RDI Hub businesses are, you don't really have an awful lot of that to work from. So you have to find new ways into it. And we would always recommend, because we've obviously had startups within Fexco as well, but I've worked on startups outside of it throughout my career. And really what that comes down to is understanding the businesses you're going to be competing with in the space, looking at who their customers are, who they're targeting, who they're celebrating the wins of, and trying to get a feeling for who's returning the greatest amount of value. And very often that'll happen through conversations with competitors. Like competitors a lot of the time are reasonably willing to talk about their businesses. But equally, it can be done through secondary research. It can be done through primary research if you have the budget, but that can be quite expensive. And you use all of these things to build the picture of that business. The critical bit then is how you take it to the next level underneath that and understand, because the greatest truth is that people buy from people. They're not buying from corporates. So who are the people you're going to be selling to? And that's what we call the buyer personas.
That ties in very nicely to a previous conversation, a podcast I had with Barry O'Sullivan, and he was talking about relationship sales. And he was talking about when you're selling to a company, he said, you know, the ideal number is to know at least 5 key, I suppose, different personas within the business and kind of understand what their pain points are. Yeah. So I suppose, how many personas, I suppose Barry says that 5 is the ideal number of personas. What do you think in your experience is an ideal number? And exactly how in-depth should you be? How much knowledge should you have?
So I think it's a really interesting question, and it's a really difficult thing for businesses to get right. I'd agree with Barry. I think 5 is about right. Depending on the type of business you are and the type of customer you're going after, it can be more or it can be less. But I think prioritizing them is really important. So understanding like who you need to reach out to in what order, really, to make the most of your generally, whether you're a startup or a large corporate, your limited spend and your limited resources. So I don't think there's an absolute standard, but I would think generally 4 or 5 is the ideal. But really understanding where they fall in the influencing to decision-making chain is incredibly important as well. And the complexity, when we do this, and I've done it in many different businesses over the years, but when we do this, we generally tend to find that the start of the conversation is the most difficult because what you're asking people to do is reach into almost their secondary memory of conversations that they've had with people to develop beyond very top line information. So we do it, and we do the first run of it, and it's very top line, and it's kind of like they might have 3 pain points, that are 1 or 2 words, and then we start to dig into that a little bit more and get a bit more understanding of that, and then a bit more understanding of how the benefits of the product or service that we're selling in can match or solve those pain points, and equally then the understanding of the theoretic person in the persona, a better understanding of how they interact with the world, how they interact with media, how they interact with different channels, where seeing your business is going to tweak how they remember you, how they think about you in a conversation, and therefore make the lives of the likes of Barry and other commercially focused people very much easier.
Of course, because you're targeting different people, because often the people who are researching your product or service are the people who will be using it, but they're not necessarily the people with the buying power. They don't have the sign-off.
Very much so.
So what the chief information officer or what the CEO is going to want to know is very different in terms of people who are going to be wanting to use it. And I suppose ultimately it feeds into the story about the hero journey, and you're helping people to do a better job. I suppose I'm just curious, you mentioned in the presentation talking about the importance of language, and that it's very important to get your point across and in a way that people can connect with. How do you when it comes to messaging, so many companies basically they throw everything by the kitchen sink. They're like, we've got so many things happening, we've got so many benefits. I suppose, how do you break down your messaging into like painkillers versus vitamins when you're selling a product?
I think, look, all of that starts with the ideal customer profile, right? It understanding the needs and the benefits and the pain points that drive them, right? So we do that in a really collaborative and collegiate way with the various different parts of the business. So the most important people in that conversation are the people who are facing the front, right? So who are actually meeting the people that are pulling this information in. And then we use a fairly kind of rigorous process of meetings and iteration of messaging to really focus the core elements of the message and the core proof points of the benefits that we're trying to sell. So whether that be technical proof points, data-led proof points, which is what we generally try to focus on because it's easier to sell a data-led proof point, or experiential. So, kind of previous customers having seen X, Y, and Z improvement in their space. But we have essentially a templated approach that we follow that makes it much easier. And then we use that as the core point of truth for our messaging that we develop out from there.
You're very lucky because you have a pool of existing customers, so you have your target audience, so you can run your focus groups. And do you, obviously, I assume you run regular customer interviews, and do you keep on point with what your customers are looking for?
Well, that would generally be done with the customer-facing people as opposed to us specifically. I mean, there are a limited number of us in the marketing team, and there's an awful lot of customers in Fexco, but we do relatively regular I suppose, platform-based research. So quantitatively led research, and then we do that in association and very much in partnership with the sales teams and the businesses, where kind of necessary and appropriate. And then the sales teams themselves and the customer experience managers and relationship managers in those teams would do relatively regular touch bases with customers and groups of customers, depending on what's appropriate.
Oh, very good. And then do you, how often do you revisit your personas and see if they need to be tweaked?
Ongoing. So that's something that we're back and forth to relatively consistently. So when we're running campaigns, and again, look, it varies by business, but when we're running campaigns, we at the start would generally have weekly meetings with the businesses to talk about results that we're seeing, anything unusual that's coming up, any feedback from the businesses when they're out talking to customers who are seeing what we're doing. And generally what that can do is it can help us sharpen up the messaging around a certain pain point or the messaging that's landing. So we can then focus on upweighting that or changing the ideal customer profile slightly to incorporate that insight that'll come back from the sales teams and the businesses.
Oh, brilliant. And generative AI is such a huge disruptor for business. You touched on it in the presentation. Can you tell us how you're using it in your marketing efforts?
Very carefully. Lots, but very carefully. So look, we're aware of the benefits and limitations of generative AI as it currently stands. But we do use it. We use it to develop content based on the pain points that we identify. We use various different forms of it. One of the obvious ones being obviously ChatGPT. We're extremely careful, obviously, about the fact that we cannot expose sensitive information to it. So it's all kind of very broad stroke. But we also use it then for research. So we use it to enhance our understanding within the ideal customer profiles and add some kind of additional flavor to the information that we have and some more research-based background data as well. One of the things we're finding it really useful for is content development, though. So we've been able to kind of significantly up our output by focusing on using generative AI to get us to 80% of the way there, and then we essentially use members of our team then and the businesses to bring us to the full fruition of white papers and document ads and all of the various bits and pieces. And over time that'll roll over into videos and all of the other good bits of content development that are used to feed the sales pipelines.
Yeah, it's a brave new world. With
really
AI,
is, yeah. But I think it was interesting the other day, the CEO of JP Morgan Chase referred to it specifically, and rather than as a threat, referred to it as kind of like emboldening and embellishing what humans can achieve. I think that's
yeah. Less drafting, more crafting.
Yeah, absolutely.
As you said, it does 80% of the work for you, but I'm going off topic. A lot of our customers here in the RDI Hub are founders who don't have budget to spend on focus groups. So I suppose wonder, what advice would you give early stage startups working on his or her customer discovery journey?
So I suppose use generative AI as a key bit of it. Use templates to get yourself to, there's lots of them in existence. We have our own, but almost every ideal customer profiling research-based SaaS platform has free templates out there because they're trying to pull you into their process of doing things, but they can be incredibly helpful just to frame your thinking. And then talk to people. So talk to other colleagues in different spaces, talk to honestly competitors, because generally you'll get some sort of level of information from them. Talk to people you think you might want to sell to. And then don't be afraid to reach out to, like for example in the RDI Hub, reach out to mentors, reach out to other founders, reach out to people who have done this or versions of this in the past and get their experience and their advice on it.
I suppose so many companies you see, and I've been guilty of this myself in the past, of kind of inside out marketing. You come out with all this copy and say, we've done this and it's really incredible and we've done this and it's so exciting, but you don't necessarily think about what does the customer want. And you touched on that in your presentation. You're like, people buy from people, and the language is so important.
Yeah.
So I suppose, what are your learnings around language and tone and conversations over the years?
Yeah, I mean, the first learning is to make sure that your tone is incredibly personal, right? And it is back to that people buy from people, that you're not speaking in corporate speak, right? That's really important, and we've learned that through campaigns, and it's how you engage. The second is keep it brief, right? So we've all made the mistake of, to your point, like developing lots and lots of content and lots of spiel, And really, it's the one line that you need to get across. So make sure that you're very clear and very targeted on what you want to sell and why the customer is interested in that. Crucially, because again, we just have to keep going back to making sure that that customer's profile is what we're communicating and who we're communicating with. And then from the perspective of the creative itself, it is down to that brevity. Like we've all tried to be really clever and do things that we thought were really smart, and it turns out in the end, it's not how the customer is going to actually experience what we're doing. They'll get bored, they'll move on. We have different parts of the business that we do this in, but like one of our businesses, we've gotten to kind of very simple video snippet ads that give you the kind of key piece of information within 3 seconds. And that's where we see great engagement and great follow through.
Talk to me about low Earth orbiting satellite constellations.
Yeah, I'm kind of lucky that I didn't go too deep into that in the meeting out in the hall. But this came from a piece around customer understanding, right? And that ideal customer profiling. So, and it's back to, you've already mentioned, but to Barry O'Sullivan. So a number of years ago when Barry was involved with our Open Connect business, he had a conversation with a potential customer who just randomly through the conversation started to talk to him about this thing that was going to be really influential in their business that wasn't necessarily directly connected to what we were trying to sell, called low Earth orbiting satellites. And Barry came back and started having a chat with me about it, and I got very nerdy and went down a rabbit hole and read all sorts of technical specs and documentation. And it was essentially the likes of Elon Musk and Amazon and another couple of companies who were getting involved in this in kind of early doors. But essentially, before I get into what we did, a low Earth orbiting satellite constellation is a net of satellites that orbit much lower than standard satellites do, that, for example, are responsible for communications and television broadcasting and all that kind of old stuff. And their responsibility is going to be theoretically to bring the internet to every part of the globe, that whether it's accessible by traditional means or not. So in other words, if you're in the middle of the Sahara Desert, there will be a network of satellites above it that will be firing internet coverage to it. And again, if you're thinking about Open Connect, which is a cruise industry business, if you're in the middle of the ocean, there's a network of satellites firing internet coverage to you. So I started to chat with Barry about it. I got a bit nerdy about it, and we ended up writing a white paper on it, which is a very detailed white paper and a very big white paper compared to the normal ones. And I think based on learning, we'd probably make that a lot more consumable now. But the one thing it did do is it became one of the most consumed pieces of content that we'd ever created, and is kind of up until very recently still talked about. That it had a lot of influence in conversations with customers, and they brought it up at different points in time because it was so specific to understanding something about their business that wasn't necessarily directly linked to what we were trying to sell them. Now, of course, it was, but it didn't seem directly linked to what we were trying to sell them, and it gave, I think, strangely, a lot more information to them in a more consumable way than they would have had from the people who were preparing to actually launch all this stuff.
That's from a chance conversation with the customer.
From a purely chance conversation with the customer, yeah. And from, kind of Barry being the guy that he is and coming back and going, 1 minute, I've heard this thing, which was great. Okay,
now the tough question, Shane. What is the most important lesson you've learned over your career? And the answers to these I'm getting are very, very random and very non-uniform, shall we say.
So in my career, it's not about landing a killer blow. It's about how you take the blows and keep moving forward. And that goes for personal career, that goes for campaign development, that goes for strategy development, it goes for all those things. It's about the ability to pick yourself up, pick your campaign up, learn, iterate, move on, and remain focused and driven. So it's a random boxing kind of an analogy, but I quite liked it when I heard it, and I thought, yeah, no, that makes sense.
That would make an awful lot of sense for all of our founders as well. So that's very good. Thank you for that. And just one last question: would you have any recommendations for books or blogs or podcasts on ICP or marketing in general?
Sure, yeah. So there's an interesting book actually written by an Irish guy who I'm going to record a podcast with, actually, called John O'Connor, who owns a company called Deep Insight. And it's called Customer at the Heart. I'm not sure where you get it, but I'm sure it's available everywhere. And that's great from a customer experience perspective and a customer understanding perspective. I think randomly, and it's like what I'm talking about the templates being available, the likes of Qualtrics, push out an awful lot of content that's very strong on customer persona and profile development. And general marketing, and then you've got the kind of the older school marketing stuff. But I can't remember who wrote it. I'll find out and I'll let you know. But there's a great book. It's really short, called "All Marketing is Based on Warfare," and it's a very easy, very consumable book. But it correlates kind of offensive and defensive strategies and how they work, and it just very quickly makes sense of an awful lot of strategy planning.
Excellent. Thank you so much for that, Shane. Really appreciate you taking the time to do the podcast.
Thanks for having me. It was great today.
Thank you.
Cheers, Kerry.